uncertainty about where things are going.
Yeah.
Complexity, because a lot of the, for example, social issues that we face are connected with one another, and ambiguity, which basically means that a lot of the things that we see in our culture are not immediately clear.
Zwiespältigkeit.
Niederländisches bei euch heißt das. So zwiespältig, so mal so mal.
Right, yeah. There's one side to it, but also another side to it.
Yeah.
So how do you actually interpret it? How do you read it? Then we can look at all the current hot button issues in politics, in society, and they all have aspects of this.
Sure.
What that means is that there's a broad sense of uncertainty and dissatisfaction and a sense of we don't really know where we're going. And it's one of the things that we notice as well as when we meet people in Wageningen, the place where we work. There are a lot of people who have lost any sense of direction. And I think that that also connects with this theme of being able to actually read the culture around you, being able to understand the world.
For the right direction.
Right, yeah, but before you can think about whether it's the right direction or right, you actually have to be able to understand it at all. And that's often a challenge. So,
Was wir sagen, kennt die klare Linie, sagt man auf Deutsch.
Ja.
Klare Richtung.
Richtung, also
Ja.
diese Richtung.
no. It's a challenge, but I think there are also opportunities. Because with some people at least there is also a new openness to rethink certain ideas that we might have, and so perhaps also an openness to go back to the sources of our civilization. At least with some people that's definitely important. I did a survey last year about this theme, and also I asked people to identify some of the challenges that they have. And the biggest challenge that people have is actually time. Because everybody is so busy. And we're not busy with one thing, but with 20 things at the same time. So it's a matter of attention, and a matter of just making time to actually sit down and spend half an hour in silence with a piece of scripture, for example, or not any other book for that matter. For most people, it's not possible. Well, at least most people would say, well, I don't do it, I'm not doing it. I don't know whether it's not possible, because if you want to, it is possible, but there are so many distractions, and we're so used to being driven by the impulses that come from the outside, that many people just don't have that attention span. And so one of the challenges for us, and one of the questions is, okay, so is there something in this monastic rhythm and structure that we can use to help people to develop a slower pace of life, you know, and a more attentive way of living? It requires practice. Thinking about cultural literacy a bit more, I think there are three goals that we're looking at. First of all, it's a matter of knowledge, simply of knowing our culture, our tradition, knowing a bit about history, where we came from, why, because that helps us to understand why things are the way they are. And I know that for myself, for example, I'm interested in history, so I tend to read a lot of books about history. But I also noticed that a lot of people simply don't know. And so, I don't know how it is here in Germany, but certainly in the Netherlands, the level of education in history, for example, is really much lower now than it was 20 or 50 years ago. So people have whole gaps in their timeline. Sort of, okay, yeah, there was something with the Romans, and then I don't know what happened, and then in 1500 we had the Reformation, and there's 1,000 years of nothing, or well, in fact, a lot happened, and the basic structures of how our culture is formed come from that period. So we need to know. So knowledge is, I think, an important aspect, and obviously some people are more capable of more and willing to dig deeper than others. That's all understandable. But at the same time, I think it's important to have at least a basic level of knowledge about culture and history. The second thing has to do with skills, just practical skills of, well, for example, reading well and being able to sit down and spend half an hour in silence, things like that. And the third element, I think, is attitude. So that has to do with orientation, the basic orientation that we have towards the outside world. Because a lot of the challenges, like, for example, I don't have time for this, or I'm too busy doing other things. If you go back deep enough, it has to do with priorities. It has to do with your own attitude and the choices that you make in your life. Now, I don't want to say this in terms of, okay, so we need to give people a sense of shame or guilt about, oh, I'm so busy, yes, I'm a bad person. Of course not. What we want to do is to offer some opportunities where people can actually experience, like during those 3 days here, experience a different pattern and what happens if you actually spend time reading and writing and spend time in prayer. Like I said, I think that there are 3 basic tools that will help with this, and they go back to the classical understanding of education. So reading and being able to read well, writing and sharing, being able to communicate what you've learned. And there might be other tools. Certain crafts, for example. 2 years ago, I spent one winter learning a bit about woodworking, and so I built a wooden table.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. It was intense, and not. It's strange because. In a way, it's not so difficult, or at least on paper, it's not so difficult. But then actually spending half a year working with a piece of wood until it's nice the way you want to have it. It takes so much time and practice to learn how to use the tools, for example. And so, one of the things that I learned there is it is not just about the craft, it's also about craftsmanship, about what you learn in the process and the kind of attitude that you have. And simply just using a handheld plane rather than machinery. Just working with your hands, it means that you cannot force it. If there's a hard spot in the wood, and you have to plane it, you just have to go with the structure of the wood. You cannot, force it and say, well, I want this to go away. Whereas if you take a machine, you can flatten it in one go. But that's precisely not the point. Is
a lot of pieces.
right, and there's something good about it because it forces you to integrate theory and practice. And I think there is something very wholesome about developing those kinds of skills. So reading, for example, I take reading here as a kind of a metaphor for the interpretation of all sorts of sciences. It could be a book, of course, but it could also be. So yesterday I went again to Fritzlar, to the cathedral there. If you walk into that cathedral, you see all the carved stones. You see the altar. You see the baptismal forms, etc. All those pieces are science, and it takes time to actually learn how to read those, how to interpret them, to understand why it is constructed in the way it is constructed. And so I take reading in that broad sense. So with language it could be books, but it could also be visual symbols and or music. Sometimes we have all of those together in the liturgy, for example. I think it's important to help people understand those, because they won't learn it at school anymore. 50 years ago or so, just by attending school, you would learn most of this cultural heritage. But right now, it's no longer part of the curriculum. So we have to find other ways to help people read well. Something similar goes on with writing. Again, I take it metaphorically as the creation of new cultural signs. It could be in language, text, reflections. So one of the things that we did during the workshop here is I had two reflection questions every day. So at the end of the day, we would just spend some time reflecting on all the things that we've learned through the day, and I would ask the participants to write 5 to 10 sentences, not a long piece, but just a little bit. And I also gave, I bought a journal for each one of them. So I gave them a journal and I said, well, okay, whenever you think about something or you want to write, please use it and write it down. So for a couple of days, all of them were journaling a lot. And one of the pieces of feedback that I got from that is actually how helpful it is to write, to think on paper. Because once you see it on paper, then all of a sudden you understand what it is that you're thinking. And sometimes it gives rise to a new idea.
The important things.
Ja.
Ja, das ist ja im Grunde der Hintergrund der Gewissensabbau, der abendliche Gewissensabbau, dass man mal den Tag reflektiert.
Yeah. So writing, it could be writing in shapes with visual arts. One of the people who was here in the workshop was an artist, and she liked to draw. And she made a couple of drawings based on the readings that we were doing. It was just wonderful to see that. Music. And I mentioned this already, but one of the things that's particular about writing out your thoughts is that it actually forces you to slow down. Because in your head you can think at high speed, but as soon as you write it down, it slows you down, but it also means that you have some extra space to reflect on what you're writing. And then you get this interesting feedback loop between what you're doing with your hands and what you see with your eyes and what happens in your mind. And I don't know whether you have a similar experience, but I've had it so often that once I sat down to write something down, new insights came simply by the act of writing it down. So I'm a big fan of doing that. And I think it's an important skill to learn, to teach people. And one of the things that happened here too during the workshop is that at least for two people, I heard from them that they had come to some good new insights about things that they were thinking about because they were forced to write it down. And that's an experience that I want to share with people. And I think it's important.
What you circle with your pencil on a piece of paper engraves in your mind.
Yeah. And the third element that I try to incorporate in the workshop is the one of sharing. Sharing is an important value. I mean, it's an important Christian value. As we live life together, so we need to share what we have found and share the discovery. Learning is a social activity, of course. But one of the important ideas in the background is also that we need to inspire the next generation. So we need to make sure that the next generation of believers, the next generation of the church actually hears. And again, this goes back to the Psalms, this goes back to Scripture, where you see this repeated pattern of the current generation teaching the next generation, like the people of Israel when they celebrate Passover. Why do we do this? Well, we do this because. And then the whole story of Exodus was told. And again, it's not just about the information. Of course, sharing the information is important, but it also builds community. If you have spent time with someone from a previous generation who shares stories about their experiences, it makes a deep impact on. Certainly, if you're younger, but also when you're old. I think it's an important aspect of what it means to be church together.
Ganz kurz zusammen. Das bezieht sich natürlich auch, vielleicht gleich einen kleinen Exkurs, Bibelkunde auf Exodus, im 2. Mose nicht. Da heißt dann, wenn dein Vater dich fragen wird, warum macht ihr das nicht? Das dann, und so hat ja uns das Judentum ja Jahrhunderte überlebt, auch im Exil, dass immer wieder diese Geschichten sind, die alten Geschichten sind zu ihren eigenen Geschichten geworden und konnten an die nächste Generation weitergeben.
Ja. Well, practice makes perfect, as we say. So by doing it over and over again, we.
Wie es ein physischer Holländisch heißt, Übung macht den Meister.
Ja.
Also ich sage euch halt, aber einen ähnlichen Spruch wird es auch geben.
And sharing also leads to multiplication. So if I give something away to someone else and someone else has it. And the good thing about sharing these kinds of gifts is it doesn't make me poor. So we're giving something away. It's the same with the gospel. When we share Christ with someone, we are enriched by it as well. And so I think this is an important value. So during the second day, we looked at two sort of key metaphors, two ideas about how to think about developing cultural literacy. And I used the two words, wayfinding and homemaking. And I'll explain that a little bit. But first, one step back. So I mentioned a couple of times that we live in this symbolic universe. And so we looked at this for a while. I don't know whether you recognize what's happening here. this one is fairly similar to another one. It's just this one. This is in Saint-Quentin in the cathedral in northern France, and it's also painted. It's a Jesse tree. Yes, so it's the tree of Jesse. So it has generations up to Christ. Yeah, and it's one of those. I mean, if you don't know, you just walk into a cathedral or a museum, you think, oh, well, that's an interesting concept. What's happening? Are those people playing in the tree, or what does it mean? But once you know a bit of scripture, so you understand who Jesse is, and once you know a bit about history, you know that this is a theme in the late Middle Ages, and there are hundreds of churches where they have something like this, because at a certain point it was just a very popular image that was used all over the place in many European countries. You can find it. So, just as an example of the kind of universal symbols that we're trying to engage with, not just because it's interesting, even though I think it is, or it's long ago, but also because it's a sign of how culture is part of everyday life, and also as a reminder that for us in our generation, we're perhaps losing some of the connection with our past, and if we lose that, we will also not be able to look towards the future. So that's the background here. So what's here? So wayfinding is one of the terms that I like, because that's what life is in many ways. Of course, it's connected with the way. The way Christ is the way, the Word. But there's also a connection with us. We are on our way through life, through time, through space, through basically there are two types of journeys. Sometimes we're in a phase where we're exploring, so you, and it could be that you're in a library, you come across an interesting book and you think, hey, that's what happens with the Carthusians in the 15th century somewhere in northern Italy. It's just amazing history. You dive into that and you go from one to another. But it could also be, like, for example, when I was 20 and I was a student and I didn't really know Christ at the time, and I had all those questions. Now, I grew up in a Christian family, so I knew a lot of stuff, but at the same time, I was trying to find a way to connect with it and for it to make sense. And then you go exploring, and one of the things that I realized later is, actually, I've used all those basic skills of reading. I spent hours reading, writing, because I was making notes and writing notes for myself, but also sharing. I was part of a group of students, and we were reading, for example, the Institutes of Calvin together, and we were talking about it, and stuff like that. So those skills matter. In particular, I also noticed that with the group, the people who were in the workshop here this summer, at their age, so late teens, early 20s, it's crucial to have those skills and to be able to access resources to explore things. So that's an explorative kind of journey. sometimes it doesn't have this open-ended character, but it's much more focused. So for example, with monastic movements, for example, is a good example actually, because when I was a student, I came across Augustine's rule for monks, and I found it so fascinating actually, because I knew Augustine through the Lutheran lens of, oh yeah, well basically he was like us, and then I discovered, well actually he wasn't like us. He was in a very different time, in a different cultural environment, in a different. So for me that started a journey of exploring the history of those monastic movements. So discovered about Saint Anthony in Egypt and Saint Benedict and this rule. So that's a journey which is much more focused. But again, you use the same kind of skills of reading, discovering something about the history, writing and reflecting on what it means, and then also sharing it with other people. So that's something about wayfinding. I don't know whether you've ever seen this image, but and I don't necessarily agree with everything of it, but I think there's some truth to it. This is called The Hero's Journey, and it comes from anthropological research. So someone, or more than someone, but people went through all the great myths of history, the big stories, like Lord of the Rings and the Odyssey and whatnot. And they started looking for sort of similar patterns. What happens typically in a story about a hero? And there are a couple of distinct phases. Like, for example, usually it starts with a call. It's a call to adventure. And then at a certain point, you get into the unknown territory. There might be a mentor or someone who helps. Obviously also challenges and temptations. Usually, at some point, there's a climax, something happens, it's the final battle where everything is decided. And then, if the hero survives that, then there is the journey back to return into the known world. And this, but also this idea that actually going through a climactic situation transforms you, it changes you, and it raises the question: okay, so when I return, what do I bring with me, and what can I share with the people who I meet again? And so I played a little bit with this image also during the workshop. So in the first day we said, well, okay, so let's go out and explore things. So we read some texts together here, but actually we also went on an excursion to Friesland, to the cathedral. I just wanted to show it to them. So we explored that building and looked at different symbols so that was kind of the first part of the journey. But then in the second part of the journey, we also spent some time thinking about, okay, so now that we've done this and we've learned a few things, we've been changed a little bit, perhaps even. So what do we take with us? How do we then when we come home? What can we share with people? And again, it's not something that we usually do, but I think it really helps to take time to think through in advance. Okay, so are there things that I can share with someone? It means that you're more prepared, and that helps too. So wayfinding. Because we had this already. Yeah, so we talked a little bit about the Narnia stories, for example.
Yeah.
It's another example of a whole world that is created with a lot of symbolism and metaphors and meaning. But the great thing about this, it is, of course, it's a nice story to read, so people will read it, but at the same time, this smuggles in a lot of Christian themes and ideas, so that's a good example, I think, of how it can be done well. Or we talked about music of Bach.
Kann ich nur empfehlen, sich die mal zu lesen. Die sind auch verfilmt worden, so ein Movie. Narnia ist das alles unter Movie.
Yeah,
Some stories are
yeah, part of it, yeah. That's it, yeah. Okay. So,
Can you get correct?
yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, so, and so for example,
Okay.
looking at the history of a town or a building when you go for a walk, just as examples of things that, I mean, even we could just do that. I mean, even as a church or as a group of people, you could just organize a walk through town and just look at what you encounter and point out some of the historical places or the influence of Christianity on our culture and the history of our towns. So that's wayfinding. It's going into the world. But then there's the other movement, which is the second part of the journey. Is so we've learned things, and now what do we take home with us? Well, and how can we integrate that into our lives and share it with other people? So that's what I call homemaking. So finding things to bring home, how to integrate it, and for example, developing a personal rule of life is one example of that. So I went on a journey learning more about monasticism, and then one of the things that I take home from that is that I try to maintain this rhythm of daily prayer
Ganz kurz, das haben wir auch in unserem grünen Katechismus, die Lebensregel, ne? Dominikanische Lebensregel. Können wir vielleicht
Villa,
müssen wir vielleicht nehme ich das heute Nachmittag
Einfach mal aufschlagen.
dass wir den mal heute Nachmittag mal nehmen, Gerhard.
Und die spontane Idee wäre, dass wir für einen kleinen Exkurs nur nach Ziegenhain fahren. Da steht Martin Butzer. Der steht in Ziegenhain vor der Kirche. Und da hat Ziegenhain ist praktisch die Erinnerung, die Reformationsstadt oder die Konfirmationsstadt in Europa, wo er das eingeführt hat. Und wenn das nur einfach mal eine Stunde ist, wo wir hinfahren, Eis essen, wieder zurückkommen, mit dem, was du sagst.
Kann man das heute noch ins Programm? Wir sind ja
Ist nicht viel.
Wir müssen wohl mitfahren damit jemandem.
Ja, das kann man sehen. Vielleicht das ist eine gute Idee, weil Martin Butzer nämlich auch für die amerikanische Kirche, der hat nämlich an dem Common Prayer Book von 1552 mitgearbeitet. Natürlich ein bisschen bevor wir in den Stadt.
Und das beides zusammen, was du sagst, heute Nachmittag irgendwie haben wir ja Zeit.
Ja, beim Mittagessen noch
Ja.
besprechen.
Ja.
Beschließen. Ne?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's fine.
Sorry, does it mean to integrate it, share in the family? Diese home bringing?
Yeah, for example, so because
Now look, here's a monk and his wife is a nun.
no, but because you can read something, but then you have to find a way to make it practical, to apply it in your life, and that's basically what. At least for me, that's a challenge because I'm an academic. I can't help it. I can spend the rest of my life reading books, but I need to force myself, and that's why I'm here. I want to find ways to make it practical, to apply it to life. And that's why I think it's important to at least think about how you do that and what kind of steps you can take to to bring it home and integrate it into life. So in the last part, the last day, we as a group in our workshop, we looked at sharing what we found, and I'm going to do this. Yeah. So I gave a couple of examples of things that I have found, and I want to share them with you as well, that have inspired me. So one of them is this man on the left. His name is Stratford Caldecott. Sadly, he passed away years ago.
What's his name?
Stratford Caldecott.
Oh.
I met. So we lived in England in 2007 to 2010, and I met him in Oxford at the time. He was a Roman Catholic scholar, and he has written a few books about, for example, about
Tolkien.
the spiritual vision behind Lord of the Rings, and about Tolkien as well, the spiritual life of Tolkien. And one of the reasons why, and he also wrote this book, Duty for Truth's Sake, on the re-enchantment of education. And you can look at it. It's a very good.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Also die besten englischen Autoren sind Tolkien und Lewis. C.S. Lewis. Die beiden. Also die sollte man schon mal irgendwie nicht auf Deutsch lesen.
Ja.
Ich war mal in Oxford, Eagle and
Child.
And Child, and I said, please, I want to sit where both of them were sitting and discussing and having their beer. And actually, Tolkien, he was a Roman Catholic Christian, and C.S. Lewis, if you want to say a few words to C.S. Lewis, some don't know the background. He became a Christian later. No?
He was Anglican.
Yeah, he was an Anglican.
But he was atheist before.
Right, yes, yeah. And actually, the same is true for Stratford Caldecott as well. So it was interesting to hear his story, growing up in an atheistic family. And then as a student, he started asking questions, and he discovered C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, and basically became a Christian through reading C.S. Lewis, like so many people. So what he did, and I found it so inspiring at the time to hear, to discover that, is to look at the spiritual vision behind learning. So what is it that we actually do when we're learning things, and why is learning important in the context of church? And so one of the connections that he makes is, well, the whole universe is designed by an intelligent being, the Logos, which was in the beginning. And it means that we can understand things. And so when we learn and when we try to make sense of the world around us, actually what we're doing is we're trying to trace the hand of God. We're trying to discern what God was doing. So the whole world, the whole universe, but also all of history is full with God's presence as well. Now, once you realize that, you look very differently at history and at our current situation as well, and you can be far more hopeful about the future as well. And that was something that I needed to hear at the time. But I also was very much inspired by his scholarship, because this was not someone who simply said, well, okay, if you have a problem, God will solve it one time. No, he actually also went back to the sources, and he was able to back up his vision for education by coming back to Aquino and St. Augustine and to Scripture itself. I found that to be a very inspiring example, also because it was coupled with a very clear spiritual life. And
So, I think it's a kind of explanation of Rome chapter 1. Because
Yes, yeah,
You
it's-
see,
yeah.
you can't see God, but you can't see what He is.
Right.
is
Yeah.
doing.
So the connection with Romans 1, where Paul says that we can see God through His works in the world, and so in one way, the mission to develop cultural literacy is about helping people to see precisely that.
Yes.
It's helping people one step further along the road towards seeing and believing in God.
I used yesterday evening at 11 o'clock with the young people and one of the leaders. He said, turn all the lights off in the main building because it was a perfect sky with
Yeah.
a full moon. And they said, I have one short experience. I said, when we went to do mission work in Switzerland, we were near to the Alps and we met at the tent meeting. A lot of tents were there and young people, and I wanted to start to share about Christianity and Christ. He said, you don't have to explain it to me. Look all the majestic stars and the heaven and the Alps. God has created it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So this is just one example. There's one other example that I shared with them is this is.
Ich muss mir das für die Kinder mal aufschreiben. Ja, also.
Oh. The lady on the left is Zina Hitz. She is. I forgot to bring her book, but she is a professor in America somewhere at a college, and she started a program. It's called the Catherine Project. And the interesting thing is, this actually happened during the Corona pandemic, when everybody was sort of locked away at home, and so she started basically a reading group online. And it was so interesting to see people from all over the world join in, and the only thing they did, is simply reading. They read a bit of Plato, they read a bit from Augustine, a couple of others as well, and it grew into a whole organization right now. So they basically run a kind of an online school where you can sign up for a reading group, but the interesting thing is that she has a Jewish background. She spent some time in a convent in Canada, became a Christian in the Roman Catholic Church in America somewhere, through reading great books, basically. That's the short summary of it. And again, it's just an example of someone who generously shares time and knowledge and is able to inspire people to do the same. And I just found this online, and it's a great example. Another one, even Yiddish, it's a slightly different story. But one of the interesting things about his vision of education is that he points out the way in which, if done right, it can help liberate people, basically, and how it can empower people.
Lieblingsautor von Putin.
Hm?
Der
Ja.
Lieblingsschriftsteller von Putin. Deswegen lache ich so ein bisschen. Weil ein sehr konservativer russischer Schriftsteller, es ist gut, was er so sagt, aber Putin hat ja mal seinen Gouverneuren empfohlen, sie sollen auch über Illich lesen.
Yeah.
Was? You don't know it? But you know Putin.
There's more to it than I think. Anyway, so during that day too, we finished with 2 reflection questions. So this is an example of the kind of reflection questions that I use. Okay, so given that we learn best in community, so who are people who inspired or challenged and encouraged you? What kind of qualities do you have? But then I actually finished with another question, which is, are there people who you can help or inspire, or is this something that you can share with people around you? And again, during that reflection time, for some of the participants, it was a real eye-opener to think, oh yes, actually, there is something that I can share with someone else. So that was a good experience to go through. So this is how we finish. I want to finish with this as well. But this is to how to make it practical. So what we did is during the last day of the workshop, I asked them to take all their reflections together to find one core idea or one thing that I found really helpful or interesting or challenging, and to write a little bit about it. And then this was on the Saturday at 3, we all came together here, and everyone else who was around as well. So we had a short celebration basically, where as a group we came together, we marked the moment. I think that's important also as part of the group process. It's important to mark your moments. And each one of the participants just read their reflection. And it was really touching to see, so wonderful to see how each one of them had learned something, but also how each one of them had made it in a very personal way. So you can immediately hear the kind of personality, the character of the people. And then there was one person who was, when we started, was a bit shy and didn't really know. It's awkward. But she had the most beautiful reflection at the end. and very personal, but very beautiful. And actually, she had thought deep and hard about one question, and just the way she was able to share it. It was encouraging to me to see that happen. But I also noticed it was encouraging to her to have that experience of actually I'm able to say something, to share something, and to create something of value for other people. Now, I think that was, at least for me, but also for it was an important experience to have that. And so this idea of kind of a school for cultural literacy is something that I'm going to develop in future. Actually, I'm working together with someone from the Protestant Church in the Netherlands, the main denomination, and they have a group of people who do those fresh expression projects, and so he helps me to develop this a bit further. I think we want to package all of this into a course that we can offer to people. And one other new development here is that I'm talking with someone who is a teacher at a secondary school in the Netherlands, a Christian secondary school. He is very much interested in integrating this in his curriculum as well. So next month we're going to have a discussion with a couple of teachers to see whether we can create a kind of a manual that I can use in the schools based on this idea. So there are a couple of new developments, but I found it very helpful that I was able to spend a couple of days here this summer to try it out and to get feedback. And I was certainly very much encouraged by the way it was part. So yeah, I just wanted to share this. And,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I might have some input on the question at the end.
yeah, sure, yeah.
Yeah. I've been more with an old-timer, and the Catholic Christian school developed also in the Reformed Episcopal Church.
Yeah.
And when I went once to the old church in Philadelphia, Chestnut Street, Christ Church, when it was still standing, it collapsed and they took it down. This was more or less our first seminary. And I went there and they showed me the Christian school. And they had some practical equipment in the hallway, obviously, in the gym. And they had fencing, fechten. And more or less also based on the idea in Ephesians, if you put Ephesians in the 3 words, sitze, stehe, wandle. There are 3 aspects. And we try to teach the young people how to stand before they start to defend themselves. So erstmal stehen lernen, einen Standpunkt in Werten, klassisch von Griechen bis C.S. Lewis. Und dann auch lernen abzuwehren. Apologetics, to defend, more to defend. But then come to the 3rd step, to fight. And if this is integrated in their character, I have a standpoint to defend, they can be used anywhere in the economics, in the politics, and the Christian world. And do you think we can somehow get this idea also connected, or how would you say, does it belong to the church?
Yes, very, very much so. Now, the American situation is of course unique. That you have the possibility to have a school right next to the church, and that you have the freedom, if you are able to pay for it, you have the freedom to actually create a whole curriculum that mirrors what happens in church. And it's great if you're able to integrate that way. For us here, that's not an option, but a second best, I would guess, is at least to encourage people to read those classical sources and to help people to find their way to. I've had it so often that when I'm speaking with someone and it's about education, for example, I go to that book. I said, I know a book about that you should read, and I keep recommending books to people, and then other books as well, just to help them to discover a different way of looking at the world and at education. To find direction. I think it's important that we do that as generously as we can. And the third thing is, because these things also, they need time and they need space. So, for example, this summer, just being able to have 3 days, being able for people to actually experience what it is like to spend a couple of hours in silence, concentrating on a book, writing about it, sharing about it. Just that experience is so powerful, because we can talk about this days on end.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
at the end, what counts is actually, if you have the personal experience, it's the same as with prayer and with the lecture divina. We can theorize it till the end of days, but actually what helps is to do it. And so in practical terms, I think if we can create environments, events where people can come and, for example, spend 1 day or 2 days or a weekend or so with C.S. Lewis, and just to read some of his texts, to talk about it, to get some orientation or guidance, or to, why is this important? How does this help? This help you? I think that would be wonderful, and because then people do not simply hear about it, but they actually experience it, and that goes much deeper.
Ja. Vielleicht mal eine gute Anregung für mal, wo sie es anbietet, so eine Seminarstunde, dass nicht nur gehört wird, sondern dass man vielleicht dann eine halbe Stunde Pause macht und der schreibt mal auf, was es ihm gebracht hat. Ne? Trägt das mal vor. Vielleicht auch mal die Idee, wenn sie es mal anbietet. Ne?
Konzentrat, konzentriert.